Unlike temperature, where we see a clear increasing trend associated with climate change, changes in annual precipitation are less certain. And when we look to the future, we see that annual precipitation actually stays about the same, even under the high carbon emissions scenario. However, recent research has shown that what we can expect to see is more rainfall occurring in more intense periods of time. So even as our total annual rainfall might stay the same, we're going to be experiencing more intense storms, and the rain that we're going to get, the precipitation that we're going to get, is going to fall into a more compressed period. So what this means, unfortunately, is that many areas that are already prone to flooding are likely to become more at risk of local flooding owing to these more intense storm events. And this is particularly true for low-lying coastal areas that are also going to be experiencing sea level rise. In addition to more intense storms and this sort of compression of the wet season, one of the expected changes that we can see is the more frequent occurrence of extreme dry years, as well as extreme wet years, and increasing likelihood that we're going to be moving back and forth between extreme dry and extreme wet years, which has been referred to by Daniel Swain as climate whiplash. And for the North Coast region, it's projected that our likelihood of experiencing an extreme dry year is going to double by end of century. And our likelihood of extreme wet years is going to double as well, expected to be about 2.5 times as likely to occur compared to historical conditions. These changes in precipitation patterns, coupled with increasing temperatures, are going to result in overall lower soil moisture content in the landscape. Basically, our plant water demands are going to increase because of higher temperatures, whereas total water available is going to decline because of this compressed wet season and increased risk of drought. We can also expect to see reduced dry season flows, particularly in the early summer through October, as a result of this higher plant water demand and lower water availability. And this also means that wildfire intensity is expected to increase. Now, we know that wildfires are controlled by a variety of factors in addition to climate, including forest management practices and human land use practices. But there's general consensus that the climate conditions that produce intense wildfires are likely to increase. And for the Humboldt County, Mendocino region, there's an estimate doubling. In the report, we explore in detail what these changes in precipitation, temperature, wildfire, etc. mean for ecosystems and working landscapes. And I'm just going to summarize them briefly here. First of all, these changes in climate for the North Coast region generally mean the loss of habitat for many of our sensitive plant and wildlife species, owing to changes in vegetation types and also changes in water availability. We can also expect to see reduced productivity of rangeland, pastureland systems, including other types of agriculture. Some of the recommendations that we highlight in this section of the report include enhancing our monitoring network to really be able to better track and understand how ecosystems are responding to climate change, and allowing us to ideally proactively address some of these changes before they fully materialize. One of the other kind of general strategies that we need to advance is the protection of habitat corridors that allow wildlife to potentially move into new parts of the landscape where they can still find suitable habitat in the future. And protecting these areas, which we call climate refugia, which are parts of the landscape that appear to be less sensitive to regional changes in climate. Finally, restoring controlled fire to the landscape is going to be really important for maintaining ecosystem health and avoiding some of the more negative effects of extreme wildfire. In addition to exploring the impacts of climate change on natural ecosystems and working landscapes, we also explore what climate change means for the communities in the region and for people. One of the key threats of climate change to people are threats to infrastructure, including transportation corridors, water supply, energy, and communication systems. There are a whole host of public health risks associated with climate change. Obviously, wildfire and smoke is something that we've all experienced recently. Increasing flood risk is a major concern, as well as the introduction of new disease vectors to the region. And this is true for the North Coast region, but also for the entire state, that these impacts are going to be disproportionately felt by our disadvantaged communities. Recommendations that we highlight in the report include better integration of climate change futures in short-term and long-term infrastructure planning. For the North Coast region, because our small population is very dispersed, we really need to make investments in emergency planning and response systems to respond to threats like wildfire. And generally speaking, we need to create fora, such as here and for this event, that bring the community to the table to consider approaches to climate change assessment and adaptation that are going to work. Again, I don't have time to go into all the details, but in this report we highlight several case studies that are showing, providing examples in which communities in the North Coast region are adapting to climate change. These include examples from Humboldt Bay and attempts to address impacts from sea level rise. We highlight prescribed burning, particularly by indigenous communities, and the role that it is playing in restoring ecosystem health and offsetting and reducing fire risks. We highlight an example in which forest management is being used to mitigate climate change through enhanced carbon sequestration, and also highlight some alternative energy programs that are happening in the region. I want to leave you with just a few key findings from our report. First off, I want to acknowledge that the North Coast region, I think, has some unique opportunities as well as some unique challenges in adapting to climate change. Owing to its relatively low population density and low land use footprint, the North Coast has, I think, some unique opportunities to implement adaptation measures that just aren't accessible to other parts of the state, particularly with respect to retreating from sea level rise or avoiding development in areas that we know are going to be particularly impacted by climate change. And this really points to the importance of considering climate change and land use decision making and the way that we grow in the region and use our land resources. Finally, I want to iterate that while everyone will be affected by climate change, it's really our vulnerable communities or disadvantaged communities that are going to experience the worst effects of climate change, and we need to put equity at the core of any conversations that we have around climate change adaptation. In particular, I want to highlight that indigenous communities in the region are really at the forefront of experiencing climate change impacts. But what we found through this report, it's our indigenous communities that are also leading the way, and that we have a real opportunity here to bring traditional ecological knowledge and the insights from these indigenous communities to bear on our adaptation planning. Thank you very much for your attention. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me at this email if you have any questions about this presentation or want more information about our study. Bye.